1984, New Orleans. A World's Fair went bankrupt while its gates were still open. America has never held a World's Fair again, so what happened? Let's go back and see it. You're walking through the brand new Louisiana World Exposition on the bank of the Mississippi, fountains, palm trees, pavilions in the summer sun. And ahead of you, three people stop to pose for a picture. This is a real photograph. A family at the fair in the summer of '84. Nobody in this picture knows what we know. The fair around them is already dying, and the paychecks of the people who built it are starting to bounce. This is the story of America's last World's Fair, and of the strange twist that turned its failure into the rebirth of a city. Every World's Fair begins as a bet, and New Orleans made a big one. 100 years earlier, in 1884, the city had hosted the World Cotton Centennial on the same river. Now, a century later, civic leaders wanted an encore, a World's Fair for the modern age, built on 84 acres of rusting warehouses and rail yards along the Mississippi. The theme wrote itself, the world of rivers, fresh water as a source of life, a celebration of the water that built the city. The price tag, $350 million. The bet was that the world would come. The projection said 65,000 visitors a day, roughly 12 million people over 6 months. On paper, it looked bold. In New Orleans, bold had always been enough before. And to be fair to the dreamers, what they built was wonderful. A gondola carried visitors high across the Mississippi itself. A monorail hummed above the crowds. That August, NASA parked the Space Shuttle Enterprise on the riverfront, and people lined up in the heat to stand next to a spaceship. The fair's mascot was a white pelican in a top hat named Seymour D. Fair, the first official mascot in the history of World's Fairs. And winding through it all ran the Wonderwall, a half-fantasy ribbon of arches, columns, pelicans, and lattice towers, designed by the architects Charles Moore and William Turnbull. Less a wall than a fevered dream about architecture itself. People who went still talk about it. The problem was never the party. The problem was the empty space around the guests. The fair opened on May 12, 1984, and the second day told the whole story. Fewer than 32,500 people came through the gates. The projection had promised 65,000 a day. The fair never caught up. Why? Historians point to a brutal calendar. Knoxville, Tennessee had thrown a World's Fair just 2 years earlier, same region, same decade, same idea. Disney's Epcot had opened in 1982 as, effectively, a permanent World's Fair. And that same summer of 1984, the Olympics were in Los Angeles, swallowing the nation's attention whole. America simply didn't need another fair. By the end, the official count stood at just over 7.3 million visitors, barely 60% of the dream, and most of them locals. The Times-Picayune would sum it up in one line: New Orleans threw a party and nobody came. Inside the fair's offices, the math turned fatal within weeks. Revenue was running tens of thousands of visitors a day behind plan every single day. By midsummer, employee paychecks were bouncing. The state of Louisiana pumped in emergency loans, $25 million by reported figures, just to keep the gates open, because closing early would have been an even bigger catastrophe. It wasn't enough. On November 6, 1984, 5 days before the scheduled closing, the Louisiana World Exposition filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy. Let that sink in. The fair went bankrupt while it was still running. No World's Fair had ever done that, not before, not since. When the gates finally closed on November 11th, the fair was more than $100 million in the red. A $40 million construction loan went unpaid, taking more than 100 guarantors down with it. Hundreds of creditors would eventually settle for as little as 8 cents on the dollar, and the legal wreckage took years to clear. The bankruptcy case itself ran until 1993. The greatest party the South ever threw ended in a courtroom. And now the strange part, the part that makes this story worth telling. The fair failed. The city won. Follow the money past the bankruptcy, and almost everything the fair built is still working. The Louisiana Pavilion, the fair's biggest hall, reopened within a year as the Memorial Convention Center, an $88 million building that grew into one of the largest convention centers in the country. The riverfront where the crowds never came became the Riverwalk, a shopping district that's still there. The fair had dragged 10,000 new hotel rooms into existence, and they didn't vanish. They became the backbone of the city's convention economy. Even the rusting warehouse district the fair was built on flipped. Developers converted the old brick buildings into lofts and galleries, and the warehouse district became one of the city's arts quarters. Nothing about the fair worked as a business. Everything about it worked as a renovation. New Orleans accidentally paid $350 million for a new downtown. It just called it a party first. The fair itself left almost no trace. The Wonderwall was torn down. The gondola stopped. The monorail trains were shipped off to a zoo in Miami. Walk that stretch of riverfront today and you'll find a plaque, a convention center, and almost nothing that says a world once gathered here. And in one specific way, nothing came after it. The United States, the country of the Ferris wheel, the country that practically invented the modern World's Fair, has not hosted one since, not in 40 years. The 1984 Louisiana World Exposition wasn't just a fair that went broke. It was the last of its kind, and nobody knew it at the time. Which brings us back to that family on the promenade, still smiling in the summer of '84. They weren't just posing for a vacation picture. They were standing at the end of an era, the last Americans to wander an American World's Fair, on an afternoon everyone assumed would come again. If you remember a place, a thing, or a promise that quietly vanished, tell me in the comments. That's where the next story comes from. I'm Vanishing Era.